Um, okay, so without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker. Okay, so Ahmed Alnaouq, he grew up in Gaza, where he earned a bachelor's degree in English literature from the Al University. He's currently based in London. He won the prestigious Chevening Scholarship to earn a master's degree in journalism from the University of Leeds. He's the inspiration for and co-founder of We Are Not Numbers, a youth-led non-profit project based in Gaza, whose goal is to tell the stories behind many of the numbers that we come across in the media and press. And Border Gone, a media project telling stories from and about Gaza in Hebrew. He also serves as an advocacy and outreach officer for the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor, and his writings have appeared in Gulf News, New Arab, and other news sources, other websites. So we're very privileged and very honored to have him here today with us. Thank you very much, Ahmed. So if I can start, so the format will roughly be the first hour. We'll be asking some questions about Ahmed's background and his journalism and his work. And then we'll open it up. So it'll be a kind of a Q&A session after that for anyone who wants to chip in a question. Okay. Okay, so just to start with a question about your background, Ahmed. You've dedicated so much of your life to trying to explain to the world what it's like to grow up in Gaza, what life is like in Gaza. And the experience, and you've experienced personally the trauma of having family members killed by Israel. Could you start by telling us a little bit about your childhood in Gaza under Israeli occupation?
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for coming and for inviting me to this event. This is the first time I speak to audience from Spain, so I'm privileged actually. So thank you very, very much. Actually, this is actually a very good question to start talking about our childhood in Gaza under occupation. I think it's a very good question because most people in the West think that this all started on the 7th of October, when in fact it started 76 years ago. My childhood and my father's childhood and my aunt's childhood and my neighbor's childhood, all of our childhood was determined by the occupation. It was affected by the occupation. If I want to talk to you about my childhood, the only memories I have is the memories of the second Intifada, in which I was only 6 years old. And the second Intifada, when I was only 6 years old, when I was going to school every day, the few things that I remember was the protests that happen every day, the killing of the Palestinians that used to happen every day, the killing of children about my age that happened every day when I was only 6 years old and 7 years old and 8 years old. I remember vividly the murder of Muhammad al-Durra when I was 6 years old, and who was a child who was killed, was his father was embracing him. He was shot and killed, and his father was also injured with him. And I think everyone knows about Muhammad al-Durra in the Middle East, not in the West. And I also remember Iman Hajjo, the few months old child who was shot while her mother was carrying her to her arms. She was killed and shot. I remember the hundreds of Palestinians who were killed, or the thousands who were killed in the second Intifada. Our plays were not. We did not enjoy our time when we were kids by going to the park or travel or go to Disneyland. Unfortunately, we were spending our vacation, the summer vacation, attending protests when we were kids. I remember when I was only 7 and 8 years old, I would go to protest every day. And the protests that happened in my city were ongoing every single day, because every single day there was a martyr in our city. And we would go, and we thought that our going out is like attending a protest here or attending a funeral here. That was our childhood. From the year 2000 until the year 2005, it was the second Intifada, and I was like, this was our life when we were kids. In the year 2006, when the Israelis withdraw from Gaza, and then immediately Hamas won the election. So there was collective punishment. There was siege on the Gaza Strip. I remember we lost everything in Gaza. In order to cook, we had to go and make firewood in order to make food. Unfortunately, this is our life in Gaza. And then wars after wars after wars in 2008, 2012, 2019, 2021. We had to go through wars every single day. And in these wars, we would lose friends, we would lose brothers, we would lose family members. Our life has been very, very difficult. In Gaza, Gaza is quite a prison. You can't get in, you can't get out, you can't get what you want. All the goods are restricted. Even the Israelis were counting the calories that the Palestinians need to survive in Gaza. This is the siege. In 2014, I lost my brother. And before that, I lost my cousin. And before that, I lost many of my friends. So our childhood, our life was determined by how many people we are losing, by the invasions that happened to Gaza. It was ongoing. It's happening every single day. And this is how we grew up in Gaza. By protests, by wars, by suffering, with trauma. The Save the Children said that in 2020 that 80% of the Palestinian children suffer from depression. They suffer from mental health issues. They all need help. And I think that this is not only about the Palestinian children, but also the Palestinian youth. Every one of my friends, they all suffer from depression. It's happening everywhere because we have been through a very, very, very difficult life.
Thank you, Ahmed. You've written and spoken so powerfully and clearly about the killings of so many of your family members. And one of the things that struck me, particularly listening to the discussion you had several weeks ago with Huda Amori and Andrew Feinstein about the most recent murders, was your focus on how the bomb actually was made, how it was shipped to Israel, how it came to kill your family members like this. And I am curious, what have you learned from that conversation? And what can you tell us about the role of so many different institutions and states in the ongoing genocide now?
So on the 22nd of October last year, when the war started in Gaza, Israel bombed my home in Gaza, killing all my family members. On that day, I lost my father, I lost my two brothers, my three sisters, and my 14 nieces and nephews, who are all under the age of 13, who all were kids. And the murder of my family changed my life forever, destroyed me. But why I did this podcast is because most people think that it's only Israel who killed my family by pulling the trigger. And yes, Israel pulled the trigger and they killed my family. But I wanted to study more who is involved in the murder of my family. So what I wanted to do is I invited Andrew Feinstein in order to talk to me about the bomb that killed my family, because I wanted to know everyone who was involved in the murder of my family. And then I realized that it's not only Israel who killed my family. There were many, many, many other people who killed my family with Israel. For example, Israel used the F-16 and the bomb that was carried by the F-16 to kill my family. So who made this bomb? Unfortunately, it's not Israel who made this bomb only. It was the US who made this bomb. It was also the UK who made this bomb. And many, literally most of the European countries contributed in making this bomb and the vehicle that carried this bomb. So when we're talking about the massacres that's happening in Gaza, the war, the destruction, the genocide that's happening in Gaza, it's not only Israel that is responsible for the killing of the people in Gaza, the children in Gaza. It is the US. It's literally the US who killed our families, because the US made the bomb. It made the F-16 and the planes that's killing the Palestinians in Gaza. They're also providing these weapons to Israel for free. Every year, the US gives Israel a $3 billion weaponry to Israel in order to kill us. And this year, they even increased that to over $20 billion to kill our family. The UK manufactured 30% of the bomb and the F-16, the vehicle that carries these weapons to kill us, and many other European countries are contributing to the manufacturing of the F-16 and F-35 and the weapons. The machine guns that Israel is using to kill us, it's M16 mainly, and it is manufactured in the US. And the UK also provides Israel with the drones, for example. There are the biggest drones factories that Israel imports its weapon from is in the UK. So the UK is also complicit. It is involved in the killing of my family. And unfortunately, I had to listen to that. And I had to ask more, because the world needs to understand that the genocide that's happening in Gaza is not only Israel's responsibility, it's everyone who is involved. They are complicit and they have a blood in their hand. And it's not only the UK and the US and the military arms and the politicians, but also the mainstream media in the West. They are complicit in the murder of my family, and they are complicit in the murder of the Palestinian families and the genocide in Gaza. Because for the past 76 years, they have been providing Israel with the cover in order to kill the Palestinians and to destroy the Palestinians. They have deprived the Palestinians of their agency. They have suppressed the Palestinian narrative. They have always provided excuses and justifications for Israel to commit their war crimes and their massacres against the Palestinian people. They have magnified the Palestinian violent act in response to the Israeli acts, and they have forgotten all about the Israeli crimes against the Palestinian people. When the 7th of October happened, we saw how the Western media covered what's happening. They lied and lied and lied again, and they described the Palestinians as terrorists, and they made a lot of claims that are unverified. And then after the 7th of October, when they saw that Israel is killing thousands and thousands of Palestinian women and children and men and innocent people, they turned a blind eye. They did not cover what's going on, because they are interested in keeping the status quo. They are interested in keeping the suffering of the Palestinian people. They are complicit in the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people and the killing of the Palestinian people, unfortunately. So it's not only Israel that's complicit. It's many, many other people and many other countries and many other companies and many other agencies. All of them are complicit against the murder of my family and the Palestinian families.
Thank you. Speaking of this media environment in particular, makes me think of one of the essays you wrote a number of years ago about what it's like, or what it was like at that point to travel abroad and trying to explain your life in Gaza to people around the world who are largely ignorant of the facts and mostly only had exposure to incredibly biased media. I imagine that must be an incredible burden to feel this responsibility of having to continuously explain your life and explain the lives of others who you grew up with. How do you approach this? How do you go about explaining to the world and basically rehumanizing Palestinians in the face of this environment?
Unfortunately, we are doing this task because the Western media is not doing it, because we are challenging the Western media. As I said, for the past 76 years, the Western media have been complicit in tainting the image of the Palestinians, of destroying the image of the Palestinians, of whitewashing the Israeli crimes. So what we do as Palestinians, whenever we go out, whenever we travel, whenever we meet new people or new countries, or people who don't know anything about Palestine or know like misconceptions about Palestine, we have to do our job in order to explain to them what is actually going on in Gaza. And unfortunately, when I first traveled to Egypt or the UK or other cities or other countries, it is always people there or here. They don't know actually what's going on in Gaza. For example, when I first came to the UK and I started explaining I'm from Palestine, people would think that I am from Pakistan. Many people did not hear even of Palestine. And then when they know that I am an Arab, for example, because I speak Arabic, they have this many stereotypes and misconceptions that I am marrying 4 wives, that I live in the desert, that I have camel, and at the same time I'm having like my private plane and fancy cars. So people don't really understand what's going on. They don't understand what Palestine is. and the only thing that they hear, I'm not generalizing, of course, this is not the case for everyone, but there are many conceptions that the Palestinians are the terrorists, that we're fighting over lands, many of the misconceptions that we have is that the Palestinians are just anti-Semitic, that we hate the Jews, that we were born just hating the Jews. And of course, this is not true. And every time I have to explain to them, no, we don't hate the Jews. We don't have a problem with the Jews. The Jews are brothers and sisters. We have a problem with the Zionist occupation. We have a problem with Israel. Israel is the one who started this war by occupying our lands and killing our people. And unfortunately, like, we can't just change this narrative overnight. Like, they have been fed, the West have been fed with false information about Palestine for the past 76 years. And we, the Palestinians, the young people who are traveling, we have to change all of that. And it's taking, I would say it shouldn't be our job to do that. It should be the Western media job, because the Western media have been covering Palestine and Israel for a long time. But unfortunately, their media was so biased. They were not neutral, not a single time. And we have to challenge that. And unfortunately, it lies upon our shoulders to challenge this misconception and this false information and this misinformation that has been prevalent in the Western media for a long time. And in the Western media, there's a lot of dehumanization of the Palestinians. I'm going to give you an example, and the BBC is notorious for that. Anytime they want to say that the Palestinians were killed, they would say Palestinians die. And when they refer to Israelis, they would say the Israelis are killed. So it's always in the media, in the Western media. The Israelis are killed, the Israelis are massacred, the Israelis are brutalized, while the Palestinians who are dying in thousands and tens of thousands, they just die. They're just lost. For example, when I lost my family, one of the mainstream media outlets, they said, Ahmed lost 21 members of his family. But I did not misplace my family. I did not just lose my family. My family was killed. They were murdered while they were sleeping in their beds at 4 a.m. They were killed. But the media always avoid to name the killer when it comes to Israel. When the Israelis are the killers, they just avoid. We, the Palestinians, we just lose our loved ones. We just die. We misplace our people. So this is the problem. We have been under a huge dehumanization campaign by the Western media that has been ongoing for the past 76 years. And it's now, unfortunately, it is we, the young people in Gaza who travel outside, and the young people from the West Bank and Palestine, when we travel, we have to change all of this stereotypes and misinformation. But it shouldn't be our job. It should be the Western media job. They are journalists. They should be professional.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. So drawing on what you've just been saying, we wanted to talk a little bit about your role as a journalist and your work as a journalist. So I'm just wondering, developing on what you've just mentioned about lots of Western journalists and the Western media failing to accurately and cover what's happening in Gaza and more historically in Palestine in general. I'm just wondering, now that you're based in London, what's been your experience of kind of your interactions with Western journalists in the UK, and how have you found this kind of navigating being in a Western country and trying to carry out your work, and yeah, how have you felt the relationship with so-called colleagues of yours as well? Thank you.
Thank you. So basically, I don't work with the Western media, with the mainstream media. I run We Are Not Numbers, and they also work for Palestine Deep Dive, which is like a Palestinian media organization. So I don't work with them. I don't interact with them directly. But I had a lot of friends who work in these publications, the mainstream media. And when we are along, because they are friends, so they sometimes they can be honest with me, and they would tell me that many of the journalists who I talk to, they would tell me that they are disgusted with the newsroom and how the coverage of the Western media is. They would tell me that they are disgusted, literally disgusted, and they are like living within like internal quandary whether to leave these publications or to stay, because it is their jobs. But they all know that the Western media is biased. It is a fact. Like, they know it very much, and many of them told me like why they are very biased. And one of them told me that, and this person, he has like a senior position on one of the mainstream media publication, and he told me every time we publish something that would criticize Israel, the Israeli embassy would call them, the Israeli lobby would call them, and we would like give them hard time. So they have been under huge pressure for years and years here in the UK, that anytime they publish anything that's critical of Israel, they would be under pressure. So many of them, many of the journalists are actually racists. They're racist. They don't see the Palestinian people as like equal human beings. And that's why they're always very biased to Israel, because they don't see us as human beings. Like we're less than human beings for them. But I would say that the young journalists who I have met with, most of them, they know that they are biased. They know that the editors are biased, but they tell me that every time they write something that is critical of Israel, they would be stopped by their editors. They would just not let them publish these stories because they have just like this restriction on the Palestinian stories and the Palestinian narrative, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. So you recently accepted an Impact Award from Amnesty International on behalf of the Gaza journalists and their role in telling the world about the current genocide in Gaza. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit about the experience of Gaza journalists and citizen journalists and the contact that you've had with them in the last few months. And also a bit about what drove you to becoming a journalist, why you chose this career path.
But as for the second question, why I chose this career, I don't think I chose this career because I love journalism so much and that I wanted to be a great journalist. I think I was forced to be a journalist. And I was forced to be a journalist after the war in 2014, which I lost my brother. And when I was reading the Western media and how they cover Palestine, I was disgusted. So I had to do something about it as someone who spoke English. So I needed to use my English to educate the West about what's going on in Palestine. So I was forced to be a journalist because there was a huge need for it. And there's not enough journalists in Palestine or in the West who cover the situation professionally. So that's why I became a journalist. What was the question again? Sorry, the first question.
Just about in terms of the contact with journalists who are currently in Gaza and citizen journalists. Yeah.
Yes, and I have to say that we are very lucky to have a million citizen journalists in Gaza. And as you know, now Israel did not allow the Western media journalists, the international journalists from entering Gaza. So now in Gaza, we don't have international journalists. All the journalists that we have in Gaza are Palestinian journalists, and many of the news and the videos and the footage that come out from Gaza, they were taken by citizen journalists. So we are in debt to these citizen journalists, because without these citizen journalists, I don't think we could ever reach this amount of information, this amount of pictures and footage coming from Gaza. Unfortunately, we depend on citizen journalists because the international journalism is not doing its job. And yes, I say that the Israelis are not allowing the international journalists to come to Gaza, but also the international journalists are cowards. I think they should challenge the Israelis and they should enter Gaza, whether Israel like it or not. And we've seen that only once the CNN journalists came to Gaza through Rafah, so they could enter if they want. But unfortunately, they're listening to the Israelis. I think the international journalists must enter Gaza. Whether Israel like it or not, they should be more courageous. They should pressure Israel. And also, like the second time that the BBC entered Gaza, they entered in Israeli tanks with the Israeli army, and they were shown what the Israelis want them to see. So that was not a neutral journalism. But at the face of that, and in spite of that, the Palestinian citizen journalists have been doing the job and more. They have been sacrificing their lives in order to take the pictures and the footage from the ground, and they're showing the world what's actually going on in Gaza, what's actually happening on the ground in Gaza. And for that, we are very grateful, because without them, we wouldn't have been able to see any of that. Because without them, it would have been like this, the first Nakba that happened 76 years ago when Israel massacred thousands of Palestinians and their stories were lost to history because there was no people who are documenting and taking the pictures and the videos. So I think we are grateful. Everyone should be grateful to the Palestinian journalists in Gaza.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, again for being here. يعطيك ألف عافية. I want to ask you a bit about We Are Not Numbers, which is an organization that tells the stories behind the numbers of Palestinians in the news. How did this project come about? What has the reaction to it been? But also maybe a bit more generally, yesterday we also had a keynote by Dr. Ghassan Abu Sita, who wrote a piece a few months ago called The Deep Medicine of Humanizing Palestinians. So if you could tell us a bit about what you think the role of storytelling is, especially in such terrible times, whether you think of it as a resistance strategy. Yeah, tell us about this project, please.
Of course. So We Are Not Numbers started after the war in 2014, in which I lost my brother. And when in 2014, when I lost my brother to the war, when Israel killed my brother, I sank into deep depression. Not only because I lost my brother, but also because I felt that we're just dying and no one is hearing our stories. No one is caring about us. We're just lost. Where the Palestinians were like living in limbo. And it's not only me, that there was another 2,300 Palestinians who were killed during this genocide, during this war. It wasn't a genocide back then. So then I was approached by one American journalist, and she asked me to write my story and to write my brother's story. So I responded and I wrote the story. So when I published my first story, and that was the first story I ever write, the first article I ever write, actually. So I received a lot of messages of sympathy and support, and that made me feel better. It made me feel better that my story is reaching in new audiences, that more and more people from all around the world could hear our stories, could read our stories, could understand our trauma, our suffering, our loss. And because I felt better, and because it served as a stress release to me, we decided to replicate what happened with me and this American journalist with many other Palestinians, in which we trained the Palestinian writers on how to write their stories, and then we shared it with the world. So we started a platform, and we called it We Are Not Numbers. We started with the training writers from Gaza, and then linked them and pairing them up with international mentors to help them write their stories in English. And we called it We Are Not Numbers because after the war in 2014, all what we have seen in the media is the numbers of the Palestinians killed, the numbers of Palestinians injured, but the media did not tell the stories behind the numbers that we often hear in the news. So we decided to call it We Are Not Numbers, because behind the numbers that you often see in the news, there are stories that are worthy of being told. There are hundreds and thousands of stories that need to be told, that need to be immortalized. Because when we write our stories, we record our testimony to history. It will never be lost. These stories will remain, and they will remain forever. And these stories can change life. Because the first story I wrote about my brother, it changed my life. It took me into a different direction of my life. And the stories that are our writers now writing, they're changing people's life. They're changing the writers' lives because they're expressing their thoughts, their ideas, their stories with the world. And at the same time, it is educating the Western audiences about what's actually going on in Gaza. Because these stories are not written by politicians. They're not written by biased mainstream media. It is written by young people who are on the ground, who are telling you their personal stories behind the suffering, behind the war, behind the trauma, behind the numbers that you often see in the news. So I think these stories are very, very important. They are more important than the mainstream media and the biased media that you often hear in the news, see in the news, because it's unfiltered and it's written by young people who just want to tell their stories to the world. So over the past 10 years in We Are Not Numbers, we published hundreds of stories that talk about different types, different aspects of life in Gaza. We talked about the war, yes. We talked about the siege, the collective punishment, the settlements, and all of that, yes. But we also talked about the bright side of Gaza, the success stories, the talents, the love stories, and everything that is bright and lovely in Gaza. We wanted to show the world that Gaza is not this dark, moldy place that you often hear in the news and see in the news, but Gaza is a beautiful place. It is a very beautiful place. And the people of Gaza are the friendliest, the loveliest, the most generous people. And we wanted to tell different aspects of the life of the Palestinians in Gaza in English, in a language that everyone understands, I think.
Thank you, Ahmed. So from there, I want to ask you about another project of yours, which is Border Gone, where you tell the stories of people in Gaza in Hebrew. If you can tell us a bit about the idea behind this initiative, but also what kind of success you feel like it's had, what kind of role it plays in times like this.
So basically, this idea, it started in 2019 because we wanted to challenge the media, the Hebrew media, and how they portray the Palestinians. We know that all the Israeli media is very, very biased. They're dehumanizing of the Palestinians. They're literally playing a role in extremizing the Israeli public. So we wanted to actually offer a different perspective, a different outlet for the Israelis to hear the truth from Gaza. In order to understand what's going on in Gaza. So we started like writing these stories by Palestinians and sharing them in Hebrew. And we have we had a huge reach actually. And many of those who were reading our stories, they were shocked. They never heard anything like that in their media. So we were trying to educate them, to offer them a different perspective, a different idea on what's actually happening in Gaza, because the Israeli media is so biased, it's so dehumanizing. Its main job is to misinform the public, to distort the image of the Palestinians and all of that. So we wanted to start something different, to something that it's similar to We Are Not Numbers. We are telling just the stories from Gaza, but this time in Hebrew. And we had a huge success, I think, at first. But then after this war happened, we stopped. After I lost my family, I could not write to them anymore, because it feels like after years of writing and telling the stories, just one moment, it took one moment, and then everything is flipped upside down. And then after I lost my family, I find it very, very difficult to write anymore in Hebrew. And also many of our writers lost their loved ones. Many of our writers in Gaza, many of them were killed, many of them lost their family, and many of them lost internet connection, many of them lost their electricity. The situation is more difficult. So now we stopped this project. Maybe we will start it again. I don't know. But until now, it is stopped. And unfortunately, I think if we want to change the situation there, if we want to change the media in Israel and how they portray the Palestinians, I think we need more effort, not just an initiative by a few volunteers here or there. You need to do a lot of work, and I believe it is very, very important. This work is very important, and it's so much needed, and no one is doing this work. So like we're leaving all of these Israelis to the Israeli media, to the Hebrew media that is extremizing them, that is like misinforming them, telling them lies and lies and lies, and making them like hate the Palestinians so much. And because they have been exposed to this media their entire life, we have seen what they did in Gaza. Because these soldiers are some of the public, and when they came to Gaza, we've seen them commit massacres and horror to the people of Gaza, because their hearts is full of hate and rage and grudges. So it's very, sometimes I just think about it, like how much did it take for a soldier who is a human being after all to kill his fellow human beings, like in hundreds and thousands. And like, for example, the pilot who killed my family, he just dropped the bomb and he killed the 21 members of my family. And I wonder, how much hate do you have in your heart to kill 14 children with just a second, and you don't care about it? So, and I think this is the work of the media. If the media was telling the public and their people unbiased news, real stories that it's full of humanity, I don't think they would have dared to do such massacres and crimes against the Palestinians. So that's why I think it's important, but unfortunately now it's closed. Like we're not doing this job anymore.
Maybe to follow up on that, if you could talk a little bit more broadly about the role of narrative in the colonization process and in upholding the apartheid regime. I'm curious, how much, the domination of this narrative, as you've already mentioned, by Israel has been important in this broader picture, beyond the current genocide. And whether also, I mean, you sound very pessimistic, obviously, right now, but is it possible that there is some shift in the narrative going on at this point? If you look worldwide, do you see any sign of hope that the narrative might be shifting?
So listen, for any country or any state or any ideology or any regime or any army, when they want to occupy another land, when they want to colonize another land, when they want to ethnically cleanse another people, they can't do it without the cover of the media. They can't do it without the cover of misinformation and weaponizing their narrative in order to legitimize all of these processes. And the Israelis have been doing that for a long time. Even before the Nakba, they said before the Nakba, they convinced the European Jews and that this land is empty, that there is no people in the land of Palestine and just a beautiful land, and it's the promised land and all of that, in order to convince their population to come and move in. And then when they came and moved in, they filled them with hate and a grudge against the Palestinians and the Arabs, that we are savages and we should kill them all. And that's why we've seen, for example, in the movie Tantura, how the Israelis, like they're old men now, they said we were killing tens and hundreds of people and raping young women. So all of that, it is because of the narrative that they have been receiving. That also, unfortunately, some people use religion, and all of religions, by the way, some people use the religion in order to misinform their public and in order to like agitate the people to commit massacres. So some of them say that, and Netanyahu, for example, he revoked the Amaleks, in which they say that they can kill men, women, children, and even animals. So this is happening in every religion. Unfortunately, in Israel, some religious people are using religion in order to justify the murder of the Palestinians and the killing of the Palestinians. So they're using religion, they're using mainstream media and the narrative in order to convince their people to hate us, to kill us, to commit massacres and genocide against the people. So unfortunately, they have been using this for the Israeli public and also for their allies, the Western media. It has been so biased since the Nakba. And I'm not saying this as a Palestinian journalist who is just passionate about Palestine. And this is research. This is research based. I studied that at university, and I read the literature about the Western media coverage on Palestine. And nearly every paper, every book, every study I read, it said that the Western media is biased against Palestine. And for many years, and I know that the BBC and the Fox News and the New York Times, they know the literature. They have read this literature. They study journalism. They're journalists, actually. And they know that they are biased, but unfortunately, they choose to be biased because maybe they're racist, maybe they're ignorant about Palestine, and maybe they are scared to tell the true narrative of the Palestinians. And also religion also plays another factor of that, because many people, like especially in America, they think that the Jews should go back to Palestine and return there in order for Christ to come back. So there are many reasons why there is bias here. But unfortunately, this narrative has been this false narrative has been successful in turning the public against the oppressed and making the public, unfortunately, in the side of the oppressor for the past 75 years. But now I think it's changing, and I think there is hope. And it's changing, I think, because of the courage of the Palestinian journalists and because of the courage of the Palestinian citizen journalists who have been taking upon themselves the responsibility upon themselves to report the truth and to share the reality from the ground with the world. And that's why we have seen that it's changing now. It's changing now. These protests that's happening all over the world at universities here and there in America, in the UK, in Spain, and everywhere, in Australia, everywhere, they are protesting because now they're seeing the truth for their own eyes, from their own eyes. and they are like challenging this mainstream media and this narrative that has been imposed on them. In London, in the UK, for example, every Saturday we see protests that has hundreds of thousands of people who protest against the Israeli brutality, against the genocide, and for an end of this genocide. And we wouldn't have seen that 30 or 40 years ago. We're seeing this now because more people are waking up, more people are seeing the truth for themselves. And it's a change, it's doing magic, because I believe that people, everyone, like the vast majority of people, the populations are good, they have good heart. And once they know the truth, they will believe the truth and they will act upon that. When they see that 15,000 Palestinian children have been killed over the past 6 months, they can't just stay silent. They will have to protest. They will have to occupy universities. They will have to do some action in order to prevent further killing and further massacres of the Palestinian children and women and men, by the way, because men are just not, you can't kill men just because they are men. They're innocent people, you know? So I believe that there is hope. Yes, there is hope because we have courageous, wonderful citizen journalists and journalists in Gaza and in Palestine who are covering the truth, and they're sharing their truth with the world, and the world will listen to the Palestinians. They will hear their stories. You are hearing their stories. Others more will hear our stories, and they will do something about it.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to draw on something that you've mentioned, also building on this idea of narratives. So lots of the media and also, very well-meaning international organizations, they often talk about how many women and children have been killed. And, lots of people have said that this actually dehumanizes Palestinian men and also kind of can feed into racist stereotypes of Arab men as being violent or cast doubt on their innocence. So I'm just wondering if you could reflect on how you see the portrayal of men in Gaza and Palestinian men in Western media compared to the role that men in Gaza are actually playing right now in this genocide. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with you. Unfortunately, for so long, we have been talking about the innocent when only we talk about women and children and elderly. But the men are also innocent. If you are not like a soldier, if you are not a militant, then you are an innocent civilian. And killing and harming an innocent civilian, whether they were men or women or children, it is wrong. But unfortunately, like we have this picture in the media that Palestinian men in their fighting age, that it's okay to kill them, it's okay to harm them. And I have seen that firsthand in the media many times, in a picture when the Israelis bombed the Jabalia refugee camp and killed over 400 people in their homes. And then there was a picture of like so many men who are like who are trying to rescue the young or whatever, rescue the injured. And there was like a commentator, I forgot his name, and he said like, all I can see now here is men with their fighting age. So it tells you that men with their fighting age, like they should be killed, like, or should be harmed. This is wrong. Men are civilians. If they're not a part of a militant group, if they're not part of an army, then they are civilians. And even when it comes to Palestine, like everyone is civilian. Everyone is innocent, actually. So you can't just harm the men because they are in their fighting age. You can't just harm men because they are men, because men are innocent. They are civilian if they're not joined with any militant group or an army. And unfortunately, the media, they have been dehumanizing men, and not only men, they're even dehumanizing the children. They're dehumanizing women. They're saying that these children, the Israelis, for example, they're saying that these children, when they grow up, they will be terrorists. This is what they say, and that's why they deliberately kill the children. And unfortunately, the media is not, they don't care about these lies. We have heard many Israeli senior officials and senior politicians call for, do genocidal statements, call for the genocide of the Palestinian people, and the media, they don't care. They just continue to dehumanize the Palestinian population.
Okay, so with that, we'll open up to questions. If anyone's got a question, I think we've got a microphone over here. We're going to pass it around. Anyone's got a question, raise your hand. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ahmed, first of all, for being here and for sharing your story and your work. I think for me, the past months I've been naive, but maybe for the first time in my life, made me question the role of the media and how much I trust the media. Because I come from Sweden, and I think we have previously had a very kind of unwavering trust in our state and in our media and in our reporting. But in the past month, I feel like I've really seen even the mainstream media, how skewed it has been. But it has been incredibly subtle in a way that it's just they focus on choosing certain numbers. Let's say just example, like with the ICJ case in South Africa, they, instead of reporting on it, they chose to mention that it was election year in South Africa to kind of problematize everything. And then with the closing of Al Jazeera, they chose to mention their supposed ties to Hamas. And I just feel really powerless when it comes to this, because I was trying to write emails and I was trying to say, why do you choose these data? But because it's so subtle, they say they're not doing anything wrong. And it just makes me feel incredibly powerless to see like what I can do. So I was wondering if you have any examples, like should we just continue to write, to push? Should we just continue to provide other stories? What would you say would be a good or better technique to counter these narratives?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. Actually, this is something that we refer to as a sins of omission in the media. The problem with the Western media is not only with what they write, with what they include in their narrative, but also of what, or actually more importantly, of what they exclude from their narrative. Because if you watch the news in the Western media, they will tell you some accurate stuff, yes. But it's not only about this. It will not actually be accurate if you're like omitting, if you're deleting the biggest part of the question. For example, in the Western media, when you read the news about Palestine, you will never hear some important. They will never put a context to their coverage. You will never hear words like military occupation, which is the source of all the problems, source of all evils, which the Palestinians have been living under military occupation for the past 57 years. You will not hear anything about military occupation. You will not hear about anything about the settlements that are growing every day in the West Bank. You will never hear about the collective punishment of the siege. You will never hear about the daily killing of the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. You will not hear anything about how the Palestinians in Israel are treated as second-class citizens. You will not hear so many things. You will hear that a Palestinian just stabbed an Israeli soldier, and this is the news. The news in the West is when the Palestinians react. The news is not when the Israelis are terrorizing and terrorizing the Palestinians for 76 years. It only starts when the Palestinians do something. And when the Israelis respond with sheer terrorism, you will not hear about it in the media. So the problem with the media is, as I said, again, it's not only with what they include, but rather with what they exclude. They don't put a context to this conflict, unfortunately. In the Western media, for example, when there was like a hearing by the South Africa in the ICJ, they did not broadcast the submission of South Africa. They neglected that immediately. But the second day, when the Israelis responded, they live streamed it in the Western media. So why do you do that? It's because they only want you to hear the Israeli narrative. They don't want you to hear the Palestinian or the pro-Palestine narrative. They only want you to hear the Israelis. And this is it was very clear. It's very clear for anyone who understands journalism, for anyone who studied journalism, it would be very clear to them. For anyone who understands the situation, this conflict, they will tell that this is a very, very, very biased media. So now what we do about it? I think we should learn from our enemies. The Israelis, like for many, many years, they have been emailing and writing to the publishers, to the editors, day and night, whenever they see something very critical of Israel. But we don't want to criticize the Western media when they say something like critical of Palestine, of Hamas, for example. You can criticize Hamas as much as you want, but we need to write to them every time they are biased. Every time they're not neutral, we have to write them. We have to shower them with emails every time they make any mistake, because we have to show them that if you make a mistake, if you dehumanize the Palestinians, if you publish misinformation, they have to know that we are watching, and we know that they are biased, and we have to email them. And don't underestimate that. Like if we email them in hundreds and thousands, I think they will change. They will have to change, because they care about the public eventually. And if they know that all the public, like, they're losing their trust in them, they will have to change. So I believe, yes, writing them is very, very important. And also the other thing, we have to start like creating a different an alternative for the mainstream media. We have to follow the Palestinians and the Palestinian journalists and the alternative Palestinian publications. For example, in English, we have many, many other alternatives. We have, for example, Al Jazeera English is doing very well when it comes to conflict. There's like the New Arab, the Middle East Eye, the Middle East Monitor, Palestine Chronicle, the Electronic Intifada, Democracy Now. There are many, many, many other websites in English that are covering alternative media, and they're very good. They're doing very, very good job. And also, we are not numbers, of course. So we have to leave this mainstream media that is biased. We have to tell them that, no, we don't trust you. Your coverage is no longer trusted. And we have found the alternative, which is providing a better coverage on Israel-Palestine. I hope this answered your question.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for your insights, and especially for sharing your personal experience. What has impressed me most about Palestinian journalists and citizen journalists is not only the incredible strength it takes to share the truth, but the immense resilience it takes to keep doing so while also dealing with personal loss. And if you feel comfortable doing so, I would be honored to hear more about how you personally have experienced doing so, how you're able to move forward to find the strength to keep sharing stories while dealing with your own loss, and how in general Palestinian journalists find courage and hope to keep doing so.
Thank you very much for this question. So listen, Israel killed my parents. They killed my 3 brothers and 3 sisters and 14 nieces and nephews and many of my cousins. And they destroyed my home. And they killed over 140 other Palestinian journalists. And they killed over 35,000 Palestinians in this war. And they have destroyed Gaza. They have destroyed my schools, my universities. They have destroyed and killed everything I care about and I care for in this life. So why would I be scared to tell the truth? Like now it is the time. Now it is the time to take a decision, whether you stand at the wrong side of history or the right side of history. Now it's not the time for cowards and heartless people. Now it's the time for brave and courageous people, and we have to do that. And by the way, I'm living in the UK, which is a free country to some extent. So I don't say that when we talk that I am courageous. I'm not. That I'm just doing my job. The courageous and the brave people are the people who are in the ground in the Gaza Strip. The hundreds and maybe thousands of journalists and citizen journalists who are literally risking their lives in order to report the truth to you so that you know the truth. And yes, 140 Palestinian journalists were killed, but there are maybe hundreds of other citizen journalists who were killed in this war. Many of the journalists who survived this war, they lost family members. Wael Dahdouh lost his family while he was covering the news, and he was injured himself. Many of the other journalists lost their family members. And many of them, I'm sure we will lose, because the war is still ongoing. So now it is the time to leave a print in this world. Now it's the time to do something for the better good of your people and for humanity. If I am silent and he is silent and she is silent, then we are all complicit, because now silence is complicity. Like if you are silent, then you are complicit. And I don't want to be complicit. I do not want to be complicit with the Israelis against the murder of my family and the people in Gaza. And let it be whatever it is. Like, if they want to kill me, I don't care. If they want to imprison me, I don't care. Now it's the time. Really, like, now it's the time. If we are silent this time, then when we are going to speak? And it's not only about me, by the way, or about the Palestinian journalists. It's about everyone. Everyone should be now vocal. The time of silence is over. Thank you.
Yeah, hello, and thank you so much, Ahmed, for the talk. I have a question which is maybe a bit more delicate, but it's something that I was wondering for a while about, because we're having the situation that the Western media is so much focusing on Hamas and on how these are terrorists, and how the whole population of Palestine is then depicted as being part of Hamas, more or less, so that it became the situation where when you want to talk in Western media, the first thing you have to do is to distance yourself from Hamas. And then I experienced as a reaction to say, like, we don't want to speak about Hamas anymore. We don't want to have to defend ourselves all the time. And still what I experience a lot when talking to people who are subjected to Western media most of the time, that this is a very important question for them, and the whole question of human shields and so on. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on, like, is there a need to still take the strength to discuss these topics and to discuss, like, the role of the Hamas and violence? And if so, whose role is that? Because who's the one who should take on this topic and discussing and defending and that over and over again? Or if we are past that point, I don't know. I hope you understood what I'm asking.
Yeah. So I think at the beginning of this genocide, we have been hearing the Western media and watching the Western media, how they enjoy humiliating the Palestinians with these nonsense questions. For example, when I lost my family, I was invited by many mainstream media, TVs, and they would always ask me, do you condemn Hamas? Is Hamas a terror organization? And I would respond, like, if you invite an Israeli citizen who has lost all of his family member, would you ask them if the Israeli army is a terrorist organization or not? Or do you condemn the Israeli army or not? Like, these questions are dehumanization, and I'm sick and tired of them. And to be honest with you, right now, I really, really don't understand what is the meaning of a terrorist. I need someone to explain it to me, because the word terrorism is only used, like, it's a Western colonial a term that's only used in order to vilify and to demonize the oppressed right now, and they're never used against those who are actually terrorists. But right now, and because of that, I don't really understand what is the meaning of terrorists. It is a word that only describes the Palestinians or the Arabs, because as far as I understand, terrorism, like in your terms, is the use of power and to kill civilians for a political mean. Is this your definition of terrorism? Because if that is the definition of terrorism, then Israel is the biggest terrorist army in the world, and that was said even by the Israeli scholars themselves. They said, one of them said, the Israeli army is the most organized terrorist organization in the world. But we only hear the word terrorism when they describe the Palestinians or the Arabs or the Muslims or the people who are not white, who are not Christian, who are not Jewish, And the word condemn, like, I don't understand what this word means. Do you condemn? What does it mean? Why do you even ask me these questions? So I think the time has passed for that. Now, if someone asks me, is Hamas a terror organization or do you condemn Hamas, I will ask them to shut up. Like, it's over with that. It's over. So, but these kind of questions, they tell you a lot about the Western media. They tell you that the Western media, and they ask this question, these Mr. Media, because they want to, the way I felt why they ask me these questions is because they invite the Palestinians, they invite a Palestinian to their studio, and they would feel like, okay, before we talk to you, before you are entitled to speak as a human being, you have to prove your worthiness to the occupier, to the colonizer, to the white supremacist people. Okay, if you condemn Hamas, if you think that Hamas is a terrorist organization, then you are worthy a human being, and then we can talk with you. But if you do not condemn Hamas, and if you don't say that Hamas is a terror organization, then you are inferior. You're less of a human than anyone. So they would always want to question our humanity. They would always want to question our worthiness. And we are always like asked to prove our humanity and our worthiness to who? To the Western media, who is actually complicit in these war crimes against the Palestinian people. So whenever I'm asked this question, I refuse to answer these questions because I'm against the premise of the question itself. I'm happy to answer this question if we are with unbiased media, and like we said, like adults, like professional people, like respected human beings, and we can discuss if Hamas is a terror organization or not. But no, they ask you this question is because it's like a litmus test. They just would want to question and to want to embarrass you, and they want to question your trustworthiness. And I refuse all of this. We, the Palestinians, we refuse to be questioned anymore. We refuse to be interrogated anymore. No, we deserve more than anyone in the world to tell our stories and share our stories, because we have been victimized for so long, because we have been killed and murdered and massacred and genocide for so long. And now it is the time that the Palestinians share their stories and share their stories uninterrupted. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll ask a question. So picking up on something you said, I think for me the last 7 months has largely been mediated through social media, and amidst the horrific images coming out of Gaza, a lot of them from these citizen journalists of death and of destruction. There's also videos of I can't remember the name of this organization. I think a circus organization. You see people doing cartwheels and backflips. You see images of kids adopting cats. They're living in tents, but they're sort of adopting cats. And you see images of people's experiences before the war, before the buildings looked like bombed out shells, when they were places where people sort of lived and laughed and played and so on. Excuse me. For me, these are some of the most powerful images, more than the images of the death and the destruction, because it's something deeply humanizing about it, I suppose. What's the question? What do you think about the power of this kind of genre, I suppose, of reporting or of images in terms of changing the narrative and changing the kind of Western perspective on Palestinians and Gazans? Thanks.
Thank you very much. This is actually one part of what we're doing in We Are Not Numbers. It's that we refuse the premise of how the Western media is portraying the Palestinian people as people who are terrorists or people who are suffering or living in tents or whatever. No, we Palestinian people, we're powerful people, we're resilient people. We enjoy sumud like more than anyone else in this world. And we are creative. We want to search for anything that would give us life and hope amidst terror and suffering. And that's why, like, I have seen many images and footage of Palestinians who are like decorating their tents or doing calligraphy on their tents, and they want to enjoy their life. So the Palestinians, and this is what we want to show the world, like, because in the Western media, we only see that the Palestinians who are like just angry and sad and mad, and they just want to, this is how they want to portray us, as the angry people, as a sad people, as people who are hating everyone, who are hating this world, and who are suicide bombers or whatever. But no, the Palestinian people are not like that. It's like, I agree with this poem. We teach life, sir. And if you go to Gaza, like, you will find that people are actually and literally are teaching life to everyone, to the world. Because we love life and we teach life, and we don't only love a life and a life, we also want a life, because we want life. We want life and we love life to be dignified and free life, not just any life. We do not like to live a life that is under oppression, under colonization, under dehumanization. No, we want to live, we want to enjoy our life, but we also want to have a dignified and a free life more than everything else. And because of that, we're willing to just die rather than be subjugated or killed or dehumanized. And that's why you will see, if you go to Gaza, I really hope that everyone can go to Gaza one day. I know it's very difficult, but Gaza is a very beautiful place. Despite the odds, despite all the odds, it is a very beautiful place. It is a lovely place. The people in Gaza are the friendliest people ever. They're the loveliest people ever, the most generous people ever. And we want to show the world the true nature of the Gazans, the nature that is different from what you often see in the news, the nature that is different from the wars and the sufferings and the siege. We want to show you our hearts, our love to life, our friendliness, our hospitality. And sometimes we try to show that in the midst of the horror, in the midst of the war, because this is who we are.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Oh, okay. Yeah, I just have one more question. So yeah, I was in the West Bank in 2018, and I can confirm that Palestinians are some of the most hospitable and welcoming people that I've ever met, for sure. So I just wanted to ask, so I'm English, I grew up in England, and growing up, I remember the first things I heard and learned about Israel and Palestine were just that it's too complicated, right? It's like these two groups of people that they can't stop fighting, and it's just too complicated to understand. So you shouldn't pay attention, you shouldn't get involved, because you're not going to understand, and the history is really long, and I feel like this is a mechanism that's used in a lot of Western countries to stop people from paying attention and understanding the reality of Palestine and of the history of Palestine, and its colonization. And I wanted to ask you, so yeah, colonization is one of the words that I feel like is often missing from discussions on Palestine, and especially mainstream discussions. And it's definitely a word that, growing up, at least in England, I never heard this word used in the context of Israel and Palestine. And I'm just wondering, as you live in London now, do you feel like this is as a concept, like, is this changing? Do you feel like normal people are starting to understand the history of Palestine and Israel within the framework of colonization and settler colonialism? And do you feel like that, yeah, over the last 7 months, this has changed, and there's more awareness of like putting it into this context of colonization? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with you. You know, the word complicated has been used so many times, but I want to tell you, this conflict is not complicated. It's very simple. It's very easy. It's a conflict between colonized and colonizers, occupied and occupiers, between criminals and victims. It is very, very simple, but it was in the interest of the Israelis and in the interest of the Western media is that they portray it as complicated, so people don't want to understand the situation. But it's not complicated. 76 years ago, the Palestinians were living in their homes and they were enjoying their life peacefully. We were not interested in any politics. And then suddenly, when the Zionist militias came and they kicked us out of our homes and lands and occupied our homes and lands, this is simple. It is simple. It's a settler colonial regime. It is settler colonialism that's happening in Gaza. And of course, the media is not interested in telling you that this is colonization, because it will destroy everything they have been doing for the past 76 years. But I think it's a changing. I think it's changing now. And as I said before, there is something about the truth. Once it is presented, it is accepted. We have presented our truth to the world, the Palestinians, and we have used social media to present our truth to the world. And the world is accepting now, especially in the UK, especially in the UK. Now, like if you go if you go to London every Saturday, and if you see these protests every Saturday, it is mind-blowing, actually. It's like hundreds of thousands of people who are demonstrating every week for the past 7 months, and they're not stopping. This tells you a lot about the kind of education these people got recently and what news they're consuming. It tells you a lot. So I have a lot of hope that it's going to change. I believe that the UK will, like the people in the UK will no longer like buy the Western media, a narrative of Israel and Palestine. They will never do it. Like once you consume the news from the Palestinians and the social media from Palestine, once you hear the stories from the citizen journalists in Gaza, you can never unhear them. They will stay with you forever. The images and the scenes that you have seen, you can never unwatch them. It will stick in your memory forever. Now, Israel and the Israeli army proved to the world that they're barbaric, that they're savages, that they are capable of killing children, that they are killing children and women and men. And the footage that came from Gaza and the scenes we have seen, we can never forget them. We can never unsee them. We can never unwatch them. And it's going to change. It's going to change the people's hearts and minds forever. I think there's no going back for Israel anymore. That's it. They lost it. They might not lose on the ground in Gaza. They have destroyed Gaza, yes, but they're losing this war. They're losing it. When it comes to their public opinion, when it comes to the public opinion, they're losing it.
Okay, are there any last questions? If not, then I think we can wrap up here. We have a big round of applause for Ahmed Alnaouq. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed, and all the best telling your stories and you know, promoting Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much. Appreciate it.
Also, one last thing. One last thing, Ahmed, as I mentioned, we really hope that next time and as soon as possible, we can have you here in person. And so you can speak here in person and we can all get to meet you. Thanks.
Of course, I would be happy to. I'd be happy to.
Sorry, actual last thing. I don't know how much you can see, but I just wanted you to know there's a room full of people here. We really appreciate you sharing your testimony with us, and also you being here as part of a larger effort to push our university to cut ties with Israeli institutions. So yeah, we really appreciate you being here. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your conference and people attending and students attending. This means the world to us. This means the world to Gaza. The Gazans are watching you. They're watching your protests. You're watching your activities, and it's giving them hope. And I would always say that the only thing that gives me hope now is the protests, and especially the protests and the activities that we see at universities. It's giving us a lot of hope that we're not forgotten, that people care about us. They want to hear our stories, and they're working to end this genocide in Palestine. So I want to thank you very much on behalf of myself and the people of Gaza.